This episode of What's Going On with Shipping, it's the March 1st, 2022 edition of What to Ship, top 5 maritime stories in the news. I am your host, Sal Mercogliano. What the crap is going on this week? I mean, seriously, people, been doing this show now for almost a year. We're coming up on our year anniversary here this month. And every time I think things are going to get better, it gets crazier out there. I mean, you go from 2020 to 2021 and you're like, well, 2022 can't get much worse. Well, it can. We've got war in Ukraine. We've got issues regarding global shipping like you wouldn't believe. So a lot of stories to get to. So let's go ahead and jump into story number 1. But before we do, take a moment, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell so you'll be alerted about new videos when they come out. Leave a comment, share it across social media. And if you can, become a Patreon, and that helps support the channel, allows us to bring this information to you on a weekly basis. All right, story number 1. All right, well, story number 1 has to be the situation that's ongoing between Ukraine and Russia. Almost a week ago now, Russia invaded Ukraine and has executed an attack along 2 primary accesses into Ukraine, one in the north toward the capital city of Kyiv, and one in the south trying to link up Crimea with the region of Donbass in the south. So I'll give you 2 sites to follow that I think provide excellent coverage of what's going on in the area. First off, on the war overall, the Institute for the Study of War, ISW, www.understandingwar.org, has a daily update, if not a couple of times a day. They are probably the best at currently tracking the conflict. They provide these type of maps that show you what is going on specifically in the country with breakdowns on as best intelligence and military units they have on the Russian side. They're not providing intel in the Ukraine, which is good. But it shows that twin drive, one out of Russia heading toward Kyiv and one out of Belarus heading southward, all heading and closing in on the city of Kyiv. And then in the south, the area out of Donbass and then the region out of Crimea trying to link up right here. And I think this is a key area that really want to talk about here for just a second, because I think it's the one that in terms of maritime and shipping has the biggest influence. So one of the things I've been following, of course, is marine traffic. And one of the things that's of note is the lack of vessels here in the Sea of Azov. This is the Kerch Strait. This is Rostov-on-Don. This is a port in the very southern tip of Russia on the Don River. The Don River is the 5th largest river in Europe. And the Don River is kind of like the Mississippi River of Russia. A lot of barge traffic, a lot of movement of goods up and down. But we have not seen movement of vessels through the Sea of Azov, commercial vessels, since the start of the war. And I think this has a lot to do with the fact that this area here between Mariupol, just to the east and west of it, have been held by the Ukrainians. Which means this narrow little channel right here is fairly well interdicted by the Ukrainians. They can sink vessels should they come in. And that's one of the reasons you're seeing vessels piling up here in the anchorages in the Kerch Strait right now. They are not coming through here. We've heard reports of Russian amphibious attacks and attempts to drive out of Crimea, out of Donbass to link up, but fighting around Mariupol is very severe. On the other hand, over here near the port of Odessa, we're not seeing a lot of action right now in this area. We've seen this vessel kind of holding here. This is the Helt. She's about the only vessel we've seen out here, but every other vessel has basically vacated the area. It's a Panamanian registered vessel. She's been sitting out here. But ships are in Odessa and all the smaller ports here around the area. And there are, I did a tweet on this the other day, there are about a dozen in each of these ports, including up here. We've got a ship, the Harald Maersk right there, a Danish line vessel sitting up in this region. These ships are all stuck in here. Ukraine has closed the ports. We know that the Russian Baltic fleet is off here. They've attacked that Snake Island that everybody hears in the news. And there's indications that the Ukrainians have mined the beaches and potentially have mined out in the harbor. And that could be one of the reasons that we don't see anybody else moving. Zoom out here again for a second, out into the Black Sea in general. And one of the things you see here off the coast of Romania and Bulgaria are large anchorages of vessels sitting here. So this is off the coast of Romania, large anchorage, very close in. This is within territorial waters of Romania. Same thing off coast Constanta, which is the major port here in Romania. And as you come down here into Bulgaria, you'll see the same thing, massive anchorage right here. Ships are in here out of international waters in Romania, Bulgarian territorial waters. They're NATO nations. So they're seeking protection from the Romanians and the Bulgarians. Romania and Bulgaria have limited naval capability. Bulgarians have a couple of old Belgian frigates. Romania has a pair of old British frigates. You, of course, have the Turkish Navy, which is a much more sizable thing. But the other issue that's come out here is the announcement by the Turks to implement Article 19 of the Montreux Convention of 1936, which prohibits the passage of belligerent vessels in time of war. Basically, Russian-Ukrainian ships will not be allowed to enter the straits. Warships will not be allowed to enter the straits. The exception to this is if any vessels in the Mediterranean are home ported in the Black Sea, they can go through. But this prevents the Russians from reinforcing the Black Sea fleet with vessels from the Baltic, from the North Pacific, and from the Arctic fleets. That could seriously impinge the ability of the Russians to continue to wage this war, maritime speaking, along the Black Sea coast in Ukraine. Reports are coming in all the time about attacks. Dryad Global, their Channel 16, does a great job in capturing this. This was a report from the other day talking about the Russian Navy detaining 3 ships, 2 bulkers and a tug. That was done, and also potential damage on a vessel, the Lord Nelson, a Panamanian flag bulk carrier. The damage was photographed as the vessel passed through the Bosphorus Strait, the Turkish Strait, out from the Black Sea into the Mediterranean. It is impossible for me in this short a time to go over the major stories, but there are a lot. This is Lloyd's list right here. They have got a ton of them. The big issues going on here, obviously, are the economic sanctions being levied against Russia. And what does this mean? Well, we already know that 4 major container liners have announced basically their stopping service going to Russia. ONE, Hapag had announced that earlier. Hapag was the first one to do it, followed by ONE. And now we're hearing Maersk and Mediterranean shipping. That represents nearly 50% of containerized shipping in the world. And they're going to shut out the ports in Russia. Add to it, Ukraine is calling on shipping aid from the IMO. They're asking the International Maritime Organization to intercede on this. I am doubtful that the IMO will do anything because the IMO tends not to do anything. But they should black flag all the Russian vessels. In other words, deny them entry into ports. And right now we're seeing countries do that. Great Britain has done it. We just received word that Malaysia did it with a Russian tanker. There's word about the EU doing it. No word on the United States doing it, however. And so we're not seeing the United States initiate any efforts at all to do that. Lloyd's List has been doing a good job covering this. There's a lot of information out here that's being funneled. Of course, gCaptain does a great job on this. There are a lot of issues out here. Rotterdam just welcomed in some Russian ships, so there's issues about that. There's targeting of Russian oligarch yachts out there. We had the attempt, by the way, of a crew member on one of these Russian yachts to sink it. We're also hearing about the fact that American pilots, those harbor pilots that bring vessels in and out of port, are refusing to bring any Russian ships in. So we're definitely seeing a variety of issues here all hitting at the same time. So gCaptain has a Ukraine crisis archive you can go into, follow along with all the key stories here. One of the most interesting ones I'll highlight here real quick is this story came out the other day on Ukraine's secret weapon seafarers. Unknown to most people, but 15% of the world's seafarers are Russian or Ukrainian. Russians are about 10%, Ukrainians are about 4.5%. And Ukrainians and Russians sail on the same vessels, actually, lots of times. And there's an interesting proposal out there for Ukrainians to walk off Russian vessels to incapacitate them by diminishing the crew on board. But this right here is a great story because you get the actual firsthand perspective from a Ukrainian shipmaster in what it's like to be out there and the situation in Ukraine. Of course, our buddies at Freightwaves are also covering this. So we're seeing it. One of the big areas that they're hitting on right here is the big surge in the price of oil. Russian money is involved in the oil trade like you would not believe. And if you start sanctioning any Russian involvement in shipping, you're going to cause havoc in the oil trade because the Russians are everywhere in it. And that's their big field that they're in. They're not in containers. They're not in a lot of other things, but they are in oil. And that impact is going to be significant. And then over at Splash 24/7, Sam Chambers and the guys over there got a great banner going over here with the latest on Ukraine so that you can immediately hit on those and update it. A lot going on in terms of the shipping situation regarding Russia and Ukraine. We're going to talk more about this in our last story. But as of now, we're seeing basically Ukraine is cut off from the world, maritime speaking. So that means 10% of the world's grain is not going to be shipped out. And with the embargoes and sanctions against this, I mean, you get the Swedes and the Swiss imposing sanctions against you and freezing assets. The Swedes are shipping missiles over to the Ukrainians. The Swiss are locking up financial accounts. What have you done wrong in the world, Vladimir Putin, to get the Swiss and the Swedes mad at you? You've reached a new level of pissing off people to get them mad at you. So a lot going on here. Let's go ahead and hit story number 2. Story number 2, shipping has gotten the attention of the President of the United States. We are ready for the presidential State of the Union tonight. President Biden is going to go before Congress, joint session of Congress, and talk about a myriad of things. But one of the things we found out he'll be talking about is global shipping, specifically the shipping of containers by the 9 big companies from around the world in their 3 alliances. Now, I have been at times harsh against the shipping alliances and their agreements, and also their advocacy group, the World Shipping Council. I mean, I may have inadvertently compared the World Shipping Council spokesman to Dr. Evil, but I mean, that's neither here or there. However, one of the things that we're seeing right now is a lot of attention being focused on this subject, and a press release out from both the Federal Maritime Commission and the White House talk about this. So 2 stories on gCaptain, one by Barry Parker, supply chain, shipping lines in the crosshairs of U.S. authority. Last week, the Biden administration followed up on its year earlier Executive Order 14017 from the newly inaugurated president, which set out to develop strategies enabling supply chain resiliency. A series of reports were issued. Matter of fact, 7 of them from different departments. I'll link them over in the show notes, including one from the Department of Transportation. It's a big report. The executive summary is 27 pages. But in it, recommendation 44, urge Congress to enact ocean shipping regulatory reform. The House has already passed legislation that would increase FMC resources, provide FMC with additional authorities to protect exporters, importers, and consumers from unfair practices. That takes you to this story right here from Mike Schuller. Biden administration ramping up competition enforcement in ocean shipping. Biden administration is stepping up its scrutiny of container shipping alliances and enforcement of competition laws. President Biden is even expected to discuss container shipping issues at Tuesday's State of the Union speech. And this builds on a series of things. Mike breaks this down. Great article if you want to look at it. He is calling out, the White House is calling out the shipping alliances right here. This comes after, again, the report that came out talking about this It goes in here, and I'll show you the site here in a second, but a lot of details here on ocean shipping. And then, of course, you get the response by the World Shipping Council. It is unfortunate that the president is demonizing ocean carriers, the industry that is the backbone of the U.S. and global economy and has been working around the clock through the pandemic to move more cargo than any time in history. All right, let's go to the specifics. This is the memo that came out. It was actually released on Friday. I posted this, and then it was yanked back. So I'd already posted this out there. The Justice Department and FMC reaffirm and strengthen partnership to provide fair competition in the shipping industry. So Department of Justice and FMC, the Federal Maritime Commission, had a memorandum of understanding that this had gone back a few years. But this new one further strengthens it. In particular, what you see here is kind of what I call the Voltron of combining the FMC strengths with the Department of Justice's strengths to create an entity that can now legislate and enforce issues against the carriers. Right here, the Justice Department will continue to aggressively enforce our antitrust laws, no matter the industry, no matter the company, and no matter the individual. Competition in the maritime industry is integral to lowering prices, improving quality of service, and strengthening supply chain resilience. Expanding joint enforcement partnerships like the partnership between the FMC and DOJ is one of our most powerful tools for promoting competition. And it goes on here to talk about the combining together of skills, the maritime and kind of data skills of the Federal Maritime Commission with the prosecutorial and lawyer skills of the Department of Justice. So FMC and DOJ now are going to be a combined entity in looking at antitrust issues regarding the top 9 container companies and their 3 alliances. Then you have this fact sheet that came out yesterday from the White House, and we're pretty sure we're going to see this talked about in the State of the Union. It's going to be a passing, a couple of lines. That's all you ever get in the State of the Union. But if it's mentioned, it's important. Just a couple of highlights here that they have highlighted themselves. These companies have formed global alliances, groups of ocean carrier companies that work together that now control 80% of the global shipping capacity and control 95% of the critical east-west trade lines. It goes on here to say they increased spot rates for freight shipping between Asia and the United States by 100% since January 2020 and increased rates for freight shipping between the US and Asia by over 1,000% over the same period. All right, I'm going to do something I don't normally do, but I am going to defend shipping lines because I think it's really important we do this. The US deregulated ocean shipping in 1984. Matter of fact, Senator Joe Biden, now President Joe Biden, voted against that. He voted against that deregulation. We further affirmed this in the Ocean Shipping Reform Act of 1998. And we have reaped the benefits of that since then. Let me be clear. The reason we move goods at such a low price is we deregulated. We basically made shipping compete against each other, and it was cutthroat to the point that it ran out most U.S. international shipping lines, the likes of Sealand and American President's Line. Yeah, there's APL today, but they're not the American President's Line that once existed. U.S. lines. And now we're in the, our ocean shipping is handled by these big, massive corporations, Maersk, MSC, Costco, Hapag Lloyd, Evergreen, the whole list of them that handle it now. The issue here isn't that they intentionally raised those rates. I don't think they did. I do not support the notion that ocean shipping carriers intentionally raised rates due to COVID during this process. However, there is a concern because such profits are being reaped right now that the ocean carriers may not go back down and they may manipulate the system to keep rates high. They're making record profits. Again, they made in 1 year what they made in 10 years in terms of profits. And I think there needs to be investigative and regulatory aspects put in place to ensure that does not happen. He goes on in this memorandum or this blog here to say more. In the third quarter of 2021, the average operating margin of the major carriers was about 56% compared to the average operating margin of 3.7% 2 years earlier. Okay, listen, look at this graph. This graph shows you the amount of money that container liners make. And notice how often it's below making profit. I mean, there are years where they're in the hole. and then they pop up for a little bit and then fall back down. They were not making a lot of money. And listen, this is capitalism. This is free market. You have to be able to make money. And granted, they are making more money now than ever before. However, again, the issue here is what happens in the long term. If the container companies in these alliances orchestrate to maintain rates high, even though the conditions that have generated the high rates go away, then you're seeing issues that need to be enforced and regulated. This goes on, talks a lot about a lot of other issues, but it comes down here to the steps to lower consumer prices. So today they talked about the FMC and DOJ, the new joint initiative to promote competition in ocean freight transportation system. The FMC will continue ramping up oversight of the global ocean shipping system. I think that's imperative. They have to fund more money to the Federal Maritime Commission. Understand, there is better information on global shipping on the Department of Agriculture site than on the Federal Maritime Commission site and the U.S. Maritime Administration site. That's an inherent problem. Goes on, the president calling on Congress to pass robust reforms to the ocean shipping industry, including reforms that address the current antitrust immunity for ocean shipping alliances. In 2017, the Department of Justice issued subpoenas to all the major shipping lines when they met in San Francisco at a restaurant called The Box. And everyone believed that there was going to be, this is part of a huge antitrust suit that was going to be leveled against them. 2 years later, 2019, the case was dismissed. No reason why the case was dismissed. These are not cartels. They're not conferences. They are alliances. And they work together to share routes, but they are not in turn manipulating the rates in the way that we've seen antitrust issues in the past. However, again, this is a new environment, a new marketplace, and there needs to be provisions to make sure this doesn't happen. For example, shippers are being charged for containers that they don't have access to. If you arrive at the port of LA and Long Beach to pick up a container and the port can't access it and you have to come back in 3 days to get that container, they're charging you 3 days of holding it. It's not your fault. You showed up to pick it up, yet you're still being charged that. And to get that money back from the carrier, you have to go through the FMC. The FMC has to investigate it. It takes weeks, months, if not a year to figure this out, till maybe a determination is made. That is ridiculous. That is ridiculous. And what needs to be done is a clearing up of detention and demurrage. Now, I will say that this document is absolutely also hypocritical in certain aspects, not the least of which is it basically compliments the Port of LA and Los Angeles, again, for their detention and demurrage charges, this system that they created of hyper demurrage, when it's in clear violation of what the FMC is investigating. A good friend of mine, Steve Ferrara, over on LinkedIn with Ocean Audit, he does the B2B broadcast on FreightWaves, last night came on and basically read this thing. And the amount of times he laughed and chuckled during reading this, it should be a drinking contest. Every time Steve laughed, you should take a drink and you'll be hammered by the time he got through this document. So be interesting to watch. I'm trying to set up a video, an interview with someone who worked at the FMC, an attorney, and I want to talk about this in some more detail. So I hope to have a video on this later this week. That's story number 2. Oh, man, first 2 stories, those are rough. Story number 3 is an update on 2 vessels we've talked about in the past. Now, don't worry about the change of scenery here. I was in my home office. Now I'm in my work office because I filmed this video, was preparing to release it when all of a sudden we got an update on one of the 2 ships in story number 3. So story number 3 involves updates on 2 vessels we've been following quite a bit. But this one right here, Felicity Ace, this is the most recent photo we've had of Felicity Ace, heavily damaged by fire. Salvage operations had been taking place. They've finally been able to helicopter on board a salvage team after 2 attempts, and attempt to start rigging her for tow. Plans were with some heavy salvage tugs to tow her into Azores. I'm saying this all in the past tense because things have changed. Felicity Ace sinks in the Atlantic Ocean. Yes, I did a whole story on her salvage, and then the ship went and sank in the Atlantic. So here's the story from Mike Schuller. Ship's manager, MOL, confirmed that the vessel sank around 9 a.m. local time on Tuesday, approximately 220 nautical miles off the Azores, citing initial reports from the on-site salvage team. Salvage teams will remain in the area to monitor the situation. Sinking of Felicity Ace nearly 2 weeks after a fire broke out in the ship's cargo area. She was carrying about 4,000 vehicles, including Porsches, Bentleys, Lamborghinis, along with VWs and Audis. Estimated cargo price, about $400 million. Now, good word is that, of course, the crew had been saved. The 22 crew members on board nearly 2 weeks ago had been able to get off and get picked up through an amazing rescue operation by vessels in the area and Portuguese Coast Guard Navy personnel. The salvage team had been on board. They had gotten a tow line pass to the salvage tug Bear. They were towing it to the Azores along with two additional tugs, the Alp Guard and Diana Kingdom. Excuse me. And the last update we had on her said that stability, that the ship had remained stable, smoke was no longer visible, and the ship had developed a starboard list. The list is, of course, the big concerning issue. Now, that means that she obviously was taking water somewhere, probably down in the engine room. The fire probably expanded down into the engine room. It just moved through the metal into the engine room, opening up the engine room potentially to the sea and leading to her fire. They had not been able to do fire extinguishing on board, so it's not like she was loading a lot of water on her upper decks. However, heat damage would have started to warp the metal, and potentially we could have seen images where piping and ballast systems are compromised. She starts taking water on board. The amount of damage this is going to do to the environment is untold. It's deep water there, depending on how far off the Azores they are, yet you're sending a ship to the bottom. And again, exposing the danger of these types of vessels, car carriers, on the high seas. So this is obviously an issue that we're going to have to see and how it unfolds. The second story was that of the Euroferry Olympia. This is a Maritime executive story. The ship had been brought pierside into Greece, and firefighters had lowered the stern ramp to get inside to start hitting some hot spots. Obviously, once they opened the doors, they introduced oxygen into the area, and the fire has kicked back up. I want to read part of the story here. Last Friday, February 25th, search teams recovered 3 additional bodies, all from the garages. That's the vehicle decks. 2 bodies were found on the 3rd level, 1 more on the 2nd level. It was unclear if they had been found in vehicles. Early in the week, teams reported finding 1 body outside a car of a person they believe suffocated in the fire. Most people in fires die from smoke inhalation, not from the fire. Unconfirmed reports said that another person was found in the driver's seat of a vehicle. Teams currently believe there are 3 people that remain unaccounted for after days of searching the wreckage. However, reports also continue to suggest that the actual toll may be higher due to people that were aboard the vessel illegally. One of the survivors reportedly was not on the manifest, leading to reports of multiple stowaways that had come aboard the vessel in Greece. So that's the update on those 2 stories. Again, I had to kind of splice this into the story here so that I can get the latest information out to you on what the ship. All right, let's go ahead and head over to story number 4. Story number 4 takes us to the Suez Canal. What's going on in the Suez? For those of you who don't know, that's the way this all started, this whole YouTube channel. Suez Canal to increase tolls up by 10%. gCaptain writing this story. The Suez Canal authorities will increase Suez Canal tolls by as much as 10% on some vessels, effective March 1st. Just 1 month after tolls were raised 6%. Most vessel types will see increases of 5 to 7%. Chemical, liquid bulk tankers, and LPG tankers will see the biggest increase of 10%. This decision was in line with significant growth in global trade, the improvement of ships' economics, the Suez Canal waterway development, and the enhancement of transit service, according to circulars by the Canal Authority. And the chart was put out by LEF agencies. They're one of the big agents that handle the Suez Canal. This comes only a month after they upped the toll by 6%. It goes on here to talk about the Suez Canal kicked off a project to expand portion of the waterway last summer, but early this month, Suez Canal Authority Chairman Osama Rabi said it would be too expensive to widen the entire length of the waterway. Rabi said the February toll hike will boost annual revenue by $400 million. Now, understand, Suez Canal just made record profits last year, even with the closing of the Suez Canal for 6 days by Evergiven in March. They made record profit. What's going on here? Well, a couple of things. Number one, that widening project. They need to pay for it. The last widening project they did by raising money from Egyptian citizens, they actually did like a bond program to raise it. They're not going to do that again because the Egyptian people are not going to support it. So they have to get the money for this. And so they have to increase tolls. When they widened the canal back in 2015, they envisioned that daily passages through the Suez Canal would go up from 50 vessels up to 90 vessels. That has not happened, which means that they're not generating the revenue you want. Add to it the supply chain crunch. Slowdowns of ship offloads in ports in Europe and in Asia means there's less ships transiting between Europe and Asia. That means less passages through the canal. That means less revenue for the canal. So the canal is actually, even though it's making more money than ever before, it's not making as much money as it should be making. And so they have to jack up the rates. They have to get more tolls per vessel than they were doing before. They were looking before for quantity versus quality. Now they're going for quality. So they're going to jack this up. The particularly high rates on energy carriers is significant. As LNG is cut off to Europe, that means LNG is coming either from the United States across the Atlantic or from Qatar and Australia, which has to come through the Suez. And that's going to make it more expensive. You're also seeing the increase in other areas here, chemical and liquid bulk tankers for fuel. That is going to be significant. And as you raise these rates across the board, it's going to add costs to the shipment of goods, inflation. Therefore, we're going to see this. I swear that since 2020, it hasn't stopped. Keep talking about black swan events, those rare events that happen. We have a black swan every month. And this story behind the scenes is an important one because you're raising the rates. Panama was scheduled to raise rates, but they held off on it. Not Suez. Suez has raised the rates, and that's effective as of today. All right, let's go to story number 5. So story number 5 is always the story I think is the most interesting, and it's this one right here. It was a story that came out by the International ICS, the International Chamber of Shipping, sorry. And the ICS story, and I mentioned into it last week, but it's really spread a little bit more. There's a lot of stories on all the maritime sites, but I put up this one from Insider because it's breaking into the mainstream and I like it. And so I always want to talk about these stories when they do. So Russia's invasion of Ukraine could worsen the global crunch in shipping, with one ship manager calling it an operational nightmare. Comes down here, more than 10% of the world's 1.89 million seafarers are Russian, and another 4% are Ukrainian. The conflict in Ukraine could make it difficult to move seafarers in and out of the country. Economic sanctions could also make it difficult to pay Russian and Ukrainian seafarers. 14% of the world's mariners are Russian or Ukrainian. Now, you think about that for a second. It's 1 out of 8, 1 out of 7, roughly. That's a significant number out there. And these crews are stuck in the middle of this conflict. But this isn't the story I want to talk about. It's this image right here. And I wish I knew who posted this originally. But this is the image of a ship's master and his first officer. The ship's master with the 4 stripes is Russian. The first officer is Ukrainian. And this was posted after the invasion of Ukraine by Russia. Seafarers operate international crews on the high seas. And what you're seeing right here is how crews can put aside their differences, their nationality differences, to work together. And to me, this is one of the most powerful images I've seen come out in shipping in a long time. This image of Russians and Ukrainians sailing together on vessels, working together on a tanker. It's obviously a tanker they're on there, is inspiring. Here they can put aside their national differences and focus on the job at hand. And we see that. But the economic sanctions can impact the world. If Russian vessels with Russian crews are not allowed to enter ports, and like I said, we've seen that. The British Malaysian. We're expecting to see the European Union doing it. US may do it, I'm not sure. But this can be an impact. If the Ukrainian crews, go back to the seafarer story I mentioned earlier, if the Ukrainians walk off vessels, they could, if the ship loses its first officer, for example, it doesn't meet the minimum requirement complement for it to sail safely. And port state controls, those authorities in ports that certify vessels fit to sail, can prevent those vessels from sailing. If the International Maritime Organization black flags the Russian fleet, prevents them from sailing. If the flags of open registries, Panama, Liberia, Marshall Islands, Cyprus, Malta, refuse to reflag vessels from the Russian fleet into their vessels, it could incapacitate the Russian merchant marine. But this image right here to me is the most powerful, because I think one of the things you're seeing here is that element of seafarers working at sea. It's a difficult life. I did it for 3 years sailing vessels. And one of the reasons I didn't do it longer, I loved it. It was the best job I ever had. I tell people this all the time, is, I came down with a condition that prevented me from continuing my seafaring career. I got married, and it's hard to be away from home for 6-10 months out of the year. It just is. It's not a life for everybody. And it's extremely difficult. A lot of these crews, especially the Russian and Ukrainians, are doing this because they can make great money, come home, and their families can live in better lifestyles than they normally could. But it's a huge onus on them. And now they're caught in the middle of a war that threatens the sovereignty of Ukraine. And this is a great image, but I'm not sure how long it lasts as Russia continues its bombing campaign and escalates it. And if you lose the Ukrainians, 4.5% of world crews and more of the officers, actually, Ukrainians make up a disproportionate higher number of officers, the senior ratings. This could impact around the world. We're already seeing stories about Omicron ripping through crews and having an impact because they tend to be older and not as in good shape. This issue can also be detrimental. So I just wanted to leave on this image. I think it's a pretty dark week in terms of shipping out there. The news is not great. Again, I've gotten into a couple of issues with some people about the fact that I feel like the Navy should be out there protecting merchant shipping in the Black Sea, and the U.S. Navy and NATO don't feel like they should be in the Black Sea because it puts them on the front line. Well, commercial ships are on the front line. We've already seen 3 vessels hit. We've seen crews wounded. We know that the Russians are grabbing Ukrainian vessels and hauling them into port. Neutral crews are stuck on their vessels in war zones, in Odessa, in all these ports around the southern end of Ukraine. Even Russian merchant crews are at risk because they can't sail through the Sea of Azov for fear of being attacked by Ukrainian artillery and missile positions near Mariupol. This is exploding across the way. I did a piece not too long ago talking about Ukraine should adopt privateers or commerce raiders, kind of akin to what the Confederates did during the Civil War, take over an offshore supply vessel, put a Ukrainian Navy crew on it, and go out and attack Russian vessels. I don't enjoy saying these things. I really don't, because commercial vessels and merchant mariners always find themselves caught in the crosshairs. We operate in international waters where there's literally very little laws involved. Yeah, airplanes fly and do the same thing, but they do it a lot quicker. And so the situation is a lot different. So I have a lot of sympathy for those merchant mariners, especially those neutral merchant mariners who have found themselves caught up in this. So to those crews stuck in Ukraine, to those crews sitting on Russian vessels, to those crews huddled along the coast of Romania and Bulgaria, hoping that Romanian, Bulgarian territorial waters protect you from this war, to the potential mining of waters in the Black Sea. And whenever you lay mines anywhere, they break loose and drift. So there's always the danger of floating mines coming loose, stray bombs, missiles. This is a horrific event. And once again, I'll say the same thing I said on my last video and everything. I usually ask for Patreons, and I did at the beginning, and I shouldn't have. Don't give to me, give to the Ukrainians, give to relief agencies. We're looking at hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians coming across the border looking for relief. Now we see the same thing with merchant mariner crews stuck on board vessels and caught in war zones. This is horrific. And I can't think of any other word to describe it than this. It's a horrific event, and it's unfolding before our eyes. I had so many people tell me before that we'll never see this again in our lifetime. And yet here we are with a basically the kind of precursor to a potential world war. And I don't say that lightly. This conflict can escalate, and we can definitely see it. That's what happened between Austria and Serbia in 1914. I'm teaching World War I in a course right now, and you can see it escalate. I'm reading right now Nick Lambert's book, The Warlords and the Gallipoli Disaster. The subtitle of this book, How Globalized Trade Led Britain to its worst defeat of the First World War. Britain invaded the Bosphorus and the Dardanelles, the Gallipoli campaign, to get not the downfall of Constantinople and the Ottoman Empire, but to get to the wheat, the grain that comes out of Ukraine. And again, 10% of the world's grain come out of Ukraine, and now it's cut off. And what's that going to mean for global shipping? Again, lots of pieces are talking about that. You can go over to FreightWaves and gCaptain and Lloyd's and Splash 24/7 and a myriad of other sources to go see it. But it's going to mean more price. It's going to be more expensive. It's inflation, and that means we're going to pay for this war, even though we're not directly involved in it, because any hiccup in global shipping hits you, the consumer, right in your pocketbook, right in your wallet. So with that cheery note, and on another, what the ship, oh man, what the ship, seriously, this is an aptly titled video I set up here for you guys once a week coming at it. All right, that's all I got. This is Sal signing off. Bye.